We're here today just outside of Leesburg, Virginia, at the Oaklands Plantation, where there will be a recreation of the largest Western Hemisphere cavalry battle in history, the Battle of Brandy Station, which eventually involved over 18,000 mounted troops as well as artillery and infantry units. What will be recreated here today by Civil War reenactors is the first part of the battle, which is the crossing at Beverly's Ford. We'll get back to this in a few minutes. I should like to note that Sam Elliott, who is starring in a recent production called The Killer Angels, or it may be retitled simply Gettysburg, is here as one of the guest celebrities, and you may hear him narrating from time to time. At 3, 2, 1, here we're seeing components of the Federal Cavalry.
Rachel? Rachel? Come back here. Come here, right now.
Get the fans ready. Yes.
Wandering off. No doubt about it.
All orders are conveyed to the troopers by means of a bugle. Infantry units often transmitted their messages by drum. There are approximately 325 mounted cavalry troops here today as reenactors. As I mentioned before, approximately 18,000 took place in this battle. Edit 3, 2, 1. Follow-up patrol of Federal Cavalry. The ravine that you see in front of you is being used to represent the actual fording, which could not be done through water because of the safety for the reenactors and for the spectators.
I kind of wanted to shoot that balloon. I wanted it to go away before something happened. I think it's kind of a possible thing before. I don't know where they come from. It must be pretty cool.
3, 2, 1.
They were not mounted this time, their horses were nearby. This regiment in front of us is the reserve regiment part of the Imperial Outpost 30. This regiment from us is referred to as the Grand Guard.
These guys are deserted, but the wall wasn't.
Yeah, fine. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please stay behind the ropes for your safety as well as the reenactment.
That's true.
Ladies and gentlemen, be sure for accuracy a great deal of this.
Daddy, when's it going to start?
Edit 321. Here on the far side of the hill we have dismounted pickets.
In close proximity of the pickets. On the morning of June 9, 1863, the 6th Virginia Cavalry were the pickets, and units of the Grand Guard were the 7th Virginia Cavalry. These were both part of the brigade of General Rummel Jones.
Edit 321. The Federal troops have just crossed the ford. They're encountering the skirmishers in the picket line.
Dismounted skirmishers of the Confederacy. One of them mounted skirmishers with the early 14th
Edit 321. You can just make out the Federal skirmishers through the tree line. As mentioned before, the Confederate pickets are set up here on this side of the roadway. I believe the Federals are now getting ready to charge a position. And although on a limited scale, this is what happened that morning. They quickly overran the Confederate. That was one of the Confederate batteries opening. Edit 321. The Confederate cavalry is being repulsed at this point. The Federal troops have not advanced yet. You may hear the bugle calls, and although things seem confused, each unit knows what it's going to do in response to the type of bugle call it receives. Federal troops are still out. One of the batteries opening up, that was the second one firing, and as you can see there was the third one. The field of battle is about to be entered. Just focusing a little bit on the Confederate cavalry. These elements were surprised. Many of the men showed up out of uniform and shirt sleeve. It goes without saying that the skirmish has started on a wide scale. Remember, we're dealing with 325 horses here. They were dealing with 18,000. However, they were not all committed at this particular engagement. Focusing for some of the individual combat.
Too much exactly what we
Confederates are now rallying their troops and getting ready to attack as a unit instead of the way they previously did individually. Confederate batteries have opened again. As you will notice, you watch closely, Federal and Confederate troops do clink sabers as part of their tribute to the actual soldiers who were involved in the battle. The object of this is not for anyone to get hurt.
Where's the ball anyway? No, the ball is the flag. Follow the flag. Lose the flag and lose again. Flag.
If you couldn't pick it up from the speaker, some of the Union infantry is now moving up in support of the cavalry. Those are blank charges the artillery is using, but you can feel a blast, even at this distance.
Lost their horse. Those 6 guys are going to block the road for the horses. Firing over the road, because otherwise they fire on a nest, you're firing to both sides. Just as much accuracy as one tone. Please hold on the back. They couldn't there be putting the horse away. Those guys are actually our cavalry down there on the ground because their spare horses are thinning. And we kind of got down to go ahead and shoot. The horse about that. How nice of you.
What they're clapping for, but it had nothing to do with the battle. There was a runaway and it was headed straight for the spectators, and this trooper caught him just in time. He was looking for a home. Edit 3, 2, 1. Federal troops have reformed. Confederate troops are just over that ridge line. Edit 3, 2, 1. We're once again looking at the federal line, which is set up 4 deep. They're being harassed by Confederate fire from this ridge over here.
With the living historians, with the reenactors, taking their vehicles, their camp equipment, and they participate in the area until after 4 o'clock. Please maintain the participant area where it is until
3 o'clock is great. What's that?
They left. Oh, it's going to be a call.
Look at that.
They died.
You would fall back around their other people as their other ones come up and go, oh, 2 to 1.
see some of the Confederate pickets on foot. Horses have been killed, slowly withdrawing from the Union.
Slightly bigger.
They knew enough not to get suckered into it.
That one's fire.
Because they're so close together that you can't get the fact that they're going to. You probably wonder why they're
Edit, 3, 2, 1. Folks, what we're going to do now is take a closer look at some of the weapons that were carried by the cavalry and are now still carried by the reenactors. The first gun that we are looking at is the 1851 Navy. It was favored by the officers on both sides of the Civil War, usually in .36 caliber. The one we're looking at happens to be a .44 caliber. Although it's called a Navy type, it's misnamed since many more Army personnel used it, but it was originally ordered for some Navy personnel and the name just stuck. The barrel is blued steel, 7.5 inches, with an overall length of the revolver being 12 7/8 inch. Edit, 3, 2, 1. The next pistol that we were looking at is a .44 caliber 1860 Colt Army revolver. Again, this is a reproduction like the other guns that you will be seeing here. It has a round barrel as opposed to the octagon barrel on the Navy revolver. It's 8 inches with an overall length being close to 14 inches. Some of these were cut out in the grips for attachment of a shoulder stock, where a small hook would grab underneath the grip frame and be tightened down with a screw. This was supposed to somewhat increase the range of the revolver, although that's negligible. Lastly, we have the Remington .44 caliber Army revolver. This was one of the widest used handguns of the Civil War. The Remington's enclosed frame design actually made the revolver a much stronger design than the open-topped Colts. We'll go back to show that again, but the cylinders on the Colts can be removed by loosening the barrel and just lifting it off. In this case, with the Remington, all that needs to be done is drop the loading lever, pull forward on the little button in front of the frame, the cylinder pops out, a new cylinder can be put in, and the barrel doesn't have to be respaced so that the cylinder can turn like it does on the 1851 Navy and 1860 Army. For that reason, my particular reenactment group, the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry, has opted to carry these. In our cartridge boxes, rather than carrying our cartridges, we simply hollow them out and carry 2 to 3 extra preloaded cylinders, which can be changed while on horseback. Now, these are by no means the only revolvers that were carried in the Civil War, especially on the Confederate side. The reason for that being that the Federal troops like to issue their own equipment so that everything was standardized. The Confederates, on the other hand, often showed up with whatever they had handy, and a lot of pistols from an earlier period, even than this, showed up. The Walker revolver, for instance, was a .44 caliber, extremely strong gun that could be loaded with black powder up to almost .44 Magnum and definitely .44 Special pressures and muzzle velocities today. Also some Colt Walker Dragoons, which were slightly shortened versions of the Walker with additional minor adjustments made to the loading lever. There were also other companies that made revolvers, such as Spiller and Burr. These were also sometimes carried. One of the favorite guns of the Confederacy is the Lamat revolver, which was a 9-shot .44 caliber black powder gun that had a 16 gauge shot barrel mounted underneath, and you had a flip lever on the hammer to determine which one of the two cylinders, which one of the two actions you wanted fired. Johnny has one of these himself, and we'll probably do a feature on it at a later date, so I'm not going to steal his thunder now. From here we move on to the most commonly carried carbine of the era, which we're going to move in just a second. This was the Sharps carbine. Carbine simply meaning a shortened barrel rifle version. The Sharps was popular because it opened and loaded from the breech, being the end that I'm pointing at right now, rather than loading from the muzzle as the Springfield and Enfield muskets did. As you can imagine, it would be very difficult to change cartridges on horseback if you had to load from the muzzle end. What you see attached here is a trooper's buckle and spring and sling. The hook from the sling is attached to a saddle ring. The trooper wore this across his shoulders. That way, if in the heat of battle with the horses jumping and mingling, he should drop his revolver, his carbine, it can only go as far as the end of this sling and he can easily retrieve it. Edit 3, 2, 1. To load this particular carbine, what you did was grab the bottom of the frame, pull down on the trigger guard, and the breech opened up top. Now, as you can see, this block has dropped down. What that has done has now opened up a hole up on top. The trooper would carry pre-made paper cartridges in a cartridge box. Simply insert it in here, close it up, and this has a very sharp edge on it. It would actually nip open the end of the paper. Then he would cock his piece, put the nipple right there, and be ready to fire. Another slightly unusual piece that was sometimes seen was the Remington revolving carbine. Now, if you look closely at this action, this looks exactly the same as the action from the Remington pistol. And in fact, it is exactly the same. What has been made different is putting a 16.5-inch octagon barrel on it, along with a shoulder stock. Because of the longer barrel travel, accuracy was a little better with the revolver than with the pistol, although not nearly as powerful as the Sharp's carbine load. In close quarters combat, the option of 6 shots versus the 1 did hold its appeal. And as said before, the extra cylinders can be carried already loaded up, so that in effect the soldier at his command could have 6, 12, 18, 24, however many shots at his disposal, depending on how much weight he wanted to carry in leather pouches with preloaded cylinders. Once again, we'll go back and look at the pistols. This is the Remington pistol again, like the Remington revolving carbine we just looked at. Of note is that the frame is continuous into a solid backstrap, so that the cylinder lifts out, cylinder goes back in. The relationship to from the cylinder to the barrel doesn't change. As opposed to the two cold-free productions, which, as you will note, the cylinder is free. There's nothing on the top on either one. In order to unload one of these guns for cleaning, or if you wanted to reload it with another cylinder, you simply loosen the screw, pull down the retaining pin. Now the barrel would slide forward. You take your cylinder out, you could put your new cylinder in. However, when you closed up this distance, you had to make sure by pulling the hammer or putting on half cock and spinning this that the cylinder would in fact turn. You could push this back so far that when you tightened it, you locked up the entire action. And that's one of the reasons why these two guns, although carried by the cavalry, were not felt to be as superior as the Remington. We can do future features on some of these black powder guns, show you how they're loaded, what they chronograph when they fire, and what it looks like at a later date. I can tell you it's pretty dramatic, and it's a lot of fun. It gives you a healthy respect for the soldiers who had to actually carry these in battle. In fact, many of the cavalry carried more than 1 or 2 revolvers. A lot of soldiers carried as many revolvers as they could get on horseback. If you recall from the Outlaw Josie Wales and some other movies, they often went into battle with several pistols slung about them. They even had what's called pommel holsters. These slipped over the front of the saddle, and you carry an extra 2 there. And oftentimes many of the soldiers would put some extra pistols under their belt or anywhere else that they could tie them down and get at them in a hurry. When we go through the loading procedure for these two guns, you'll see why that was done. It is not very quick to load black powder revolvers. You have to put in your black powder, then you have to squeeze a ball into each one of the cylinders, then you have to put a little grease in front of it, to prevent the possibility of chain fire, because when one of these fires, sparks come flying out in all directions, and if the other parts of the cylinder aren't protected, a spark could set off some of the other shots when they weren't in line with the barrel, and you'd have a blown up gun on your hand, assuming you still had your hand. Edit 3, 2, 1. No discussion of a cavalryman's equipment, however, would be complete without discussing the cavalry saber. The saber was slung from a duty belt and was meant to hang down alongside of your leg. Oftentimes when soldiers were walking around, they would lift the upper ring and hook that onto the belt to keep the sword from dragging on the ground. The sword, or saber in this case, is considered your primary weapon. Carried on your left side, you draw it with your right hand. The reason for the holsters for the pistols having the butts forward, which looks like a backward turn, was because they were to be pulled with your left hand and used as a secondary weapon, or at least shifted to that hand and used as a secondary weapon. There was no trick to having the holster with the butt forward. It wasn't meant for a speed draw. The reason you'll see it sometimes in the westerns canted that way is simply because many of the soldiers who grew up and trained with the gun being drawn from that position were more confident with it in that position and could make a quick half turn with the gun in their hand and at the same time cock the hammer. Edit 3, 2, 1. And lastly, we have the trooper's saddle. Actually, this saddle only differs from an officer's model in that the saddle itself is not covered in black leather. It's simply covered in rawhide. Now, usually when first people take a look at this, they think, my goodness, what an uncomfortable looking thing. But it actually is very comfortable, not only for the rider, but for the horse. General McClellan was excellent at training troops. He was an excellent tactician. He was just a lousy fighter, and eventually had to be taken from command of the Army of the Potomac. However, earlier in his life, he had been sent on a military mission over to the Crimea and studied the tactics and equipment used by the British and the Russians. He also noted that many of the soldiers had trouble learning how to ride, and many of the mounts were dying from heat exhaustion. What he set out to do then was to redesign the saddle. He came up with this idea for a lightweight saddle. It sits differently than Western. For those of you who ride horseback, this cants your pelvis slightly forward so that you have to ride on your pelvic bones, not sitting on your rear end like you do in a chair, and which some people have a tendency to do in a saddle. If you sit that way, you bounce and feel every motion of the horse, whereas if you sit forward on the bones and use your legs and feet as shock absorbers, you get a much smoother ride. This saddle almost forces you to do that. As far as the heat problem, that's the reason why you'll notice the front is high arched, and of course the center part of the saddle is open. That allows the horse's body heat to come up through there. Unfortunately, it also allows the horse's body heat to come up through and hit your bottom. But it did spare some mounts. The saddle is very, very lightweight, as I said. Can easily be carried with one hand, using your other hand to carry additional equipment, something that cannot always be said of Western saddles. It mounts very quickly. It can be put into action very quickly. Along the one side here is simply a leather socket. Once you've positioned yourself on the horse, you shifted the carbine, which you slung around your back prior to mounting. Now you rotated it around to the front, dropped the barrel through the socket, and now the gun would be held in place and wouldn't be rattling around. For those of you who horseback ride, once again I'll tell you that no matter how good a rider you are, there's always the chance of getting knocked off your saddle, being caught unawares, having a horse panic and bolt. For this reason, most soldiers would not put the barrel of their gun through there. They might leave it slung higher up over their back, because once that barrel is stuck through that socket, you've got a fixed point, and if you start to get thrown from your horse, that's going to prevent a natural fall. It's going to get you all tangled up. But more importantly, and the thing that we see mostly at reenactments, is people go to get off their horse forgetting that it's in there. They get about a quarter of the way off when their leg hits their carbine, and, well, let's just say it's not pleasant to watch what happens next.
Now it says already sick. Now it says already sick.
Okay. Edit, 3, 2, 1. Folks, this is just a picture of what it looks like when the whole ensemble is put together. This is my horse, Classy, and this is the horse I rode down at the Battle of, I can't remember the name of it, Brandy Station. Edit that part out, Johnny. Folks, this is what the outfit looks like when everything's put together properly. This is my horse, Classy. We rode him down at the Battle of Brandy Station with Sam Elliott and a few others. And if I can get him to get over his shyness to the camera, we'll turn a little and let you see what's what here. As you can see, I'm sitting on that saddle. It looks so uncomfortable, and in fact, it isn't uncomfortable. It puts your pelvis forward so you're resting on your bones. You'll notice all these little leads are for attaching accessory equipment, saddle blanket, rain poncho, same thing as a whole slew of them around the back. That should be hanging a little lower. Some soldiers used to tuck that under their legs so it didn't bounce around too much. Then if we look on my right side, we can see the carbine, which, as I mentioned, I put in the carbine boot, and you can see if you were starting to get thrown or you get hung up on that and flip over backwards. So most of the soldiers didn't bother with that. They either pulled the sling up so that the gun was resting over their shoulder. Sometimes they tucked it in their boot. A lot of times they just tucked it under their leg like that to hold on to it. And as we had said, it's on that sling so that if in the heat of battle it should be dropped, you can't go anywhere. That's okay, Classy. And of course, the sword could be drawn from this hand here. As I said, the pistol was actually a secondary weapon. It wasn't the primary weapon, although today we would tend to think of it as a primary weapon. The problem on horseback is that once you've fired your 6 shots, you're out of luck. This never runs empty. Whoa. So, as reenactors, we have a lot of fun, but this whole outfit is wool. It's a wool blanket on the horse, it's wool on me. And let me tell you, it's a little cool out here today. We just had some rain. Classic. But it's still hot under this thing. Well, with that, I'll leave you to the rest of the program. Okay, you can press that little red button again. I should turn it off. Edit, 3, 2, 1. Johnny, I don't know if you'll be able to use this next part. I just wanted to add a tiny bit of narration to the end of the sequence with me sitting on the horse. Folks, unless you attend a reenactment or participate in one, you have no idea of the hardships involved. Rather than glorifying war, more than anything else, I think these reenactments bring home the human hardships that these people had to endure. North or South doesn't matter. They fought for what they believed in. Please, don't allow our heritage to be stolen for us. Fight and join the NRA. Protect our Second Amendment rights. For without the Second Amendment, all the other rights are meaningless and have no foundation. Hope you enjoyed the show.